The whole Trinity is active in every Mass. And the Paschal mystery is brought to, is made present. The Last Supper, the crucifixion, the resurrection, all of that is present. And you might, just one quick aside, you might hear these words, economy of salvation. And I want to talk about this because I think I just realized myself what exactly we were talking about here. So the economy of salvation. What is an economy? Just in general, what's an economy? No econ majors in the room.
Exchange of goods and services.
It's a system in which goods are exchanged, okay? In the economy of salvation, Jesus' life is exchanged for our salvation. Jesus' life is given to make reparation for our sins so that we can be saved. That's the economy of salvation. These images represent how God brings about the economy, how he does his exchange of goods so that we can be saved. Okay, but how is that celebrated? What's the history of how Jews and Christians might have worshiped? Okay, so we begin with the Israelites. When they come out of Egypt after the Passover, they initially are to come out. Moses says to Pharaoh, they need to come out so they can worship God. It wasn't initially to be free or to leave the Egyptians in the lurch. It was just to be able to go and worship God. But he's not willing to allow that. So eventually God brings them out completely. But along their journey to the Holy Land, they offer sacrifice with the Ark of the Covenant. God gives them the covenant, which is summed up in the law, and they offer sacrifice in thanksgiving for that. Eventually they're able to build a temple in Israel, or in Jerusalem. They don't need the tent of meeting anymore. They've got the temple, and that's where they worship. That's where they offer sacrifice. But eventually the kingdom that is established under David, when he brings together the 12 tribes, and it's expanded under Solomon, eventually, not too long after Solomon, that starts to split apart. And the kingdom is split. You have the northern kingdom, 10 of the tribes, and the southern kingdom. And in the northern kingdom, they didn't always have good kings. And some of the kings set up altars to other gods. No, Syria, I don't need anything. And eventually, those northern kingdoms are taken by the Assyrians in the 740s before Jesus. Those southern kingdoms, those are eventually taken by the Babylonians. And when those are taken, that temple where they were able to worship is destroyed. And now this place that is the heart of the Jewish people, this place where they can worship God, give thanks for the covenant, and offer atonement for their sins, it's destroyed. And so after that, what do? They find ways to continue to pray together using their homes and using synagogues. So in a synagogue, they would come together and they would read the Old Testament, especially the Psalms and the Torah, the 5 first books of the Old Testament. That's Pentateuch, rather. The Torah is the law. They would read that, and then someone would explain it to them in their synagogue worship. But fortunately, after the Babylonian exile is over, they go back to Jerusalem and they rebuild the temple. And eventually Herod makes it really, really impressive. But But now they have a place where they can worship and offer sacrifice again. But they still have this synagogue worship. And they're different. This, you're kind of focused on the word and learning it better. This, you're offering sacrifice. Synagogue, temple. Okay. Now, Christians come along. Jesus comes along, creates Christianity. And the first Christians continued to go to synagogue worship. But now instead of offering sacrifice in the temple, they have the Eucharist. That's the new sacrifice. And they do the synagogue worship on the Sabbath, which is what day? Saturday. But what day does Jesus rise from the dead? Sunday. So they celebrate the Sabbath worship on Saturday, and they celebrate the sacrifice, Jesus' Eucharist, on Sunday. And they did both for the first several years of Christianity. But then eventually, probably after the fall of Jerusalem, they were expelled from the synagogue because they kept wanting to talk about Jesus, and the Jews were like, we don't want to talk about Jesus because we don't believe in him. And so they expelled them from the synagogue. So they took the synagogue worship and they brought it into their Sunday worship. Instead of worshiping synagogue on one day, temple worship on the other day, they bring them all together. Now, what was in the synagogue? What did they do? What were the elements of synagogue worship?
Reading the word.
They read the word and it was explained to them. What does that sound like? The readings and the homily. The liturgy of the word comes straight from synagogue worship. Then they offered sacrifice and eat that sacrifice. What is that? The Eucharist, the liturgy of the Eucharist, right? Both of the main elements of our liturgy, of our Mass, come straight from our Jewish brothers and sisters, right? And so the liturgy, our celebration of the Paschal mystery, is steeped in ancient, in the history that we received from the Jews. Okay. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take a break? And then maybe we can, I could hit who celebrates, how do we celebrate, when we celebrate, when we come back. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Right. 10 minutes. Go break.